Come on in, pull up a chair, and take a load off because today I am going to review and page through Call of Cthulhu Nameless Horrors 2nd Edition from Chaosium Inc. Are these half dozen tales destined to put chills down your players' spines? Or should these horrors remain unseen rather than nameless? Well, you're going to find out right after this. Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again, and thanks for joining me for the 950th review from the Gaming Gang. Now, keep in mind, we don't have 950 video reviews because the first couple of years of the Gaming Gang, we focused on written reviews and every once in a while, exclusive audio reviews for our podcast. But still, 950 reviews from the little outlet that could, not too shabby. As I mentioned in the open, today I am going to review and page through Call of Cthulhu Nameless Horrors 2nd Edition from Chaosium Inc. It's written by Paul Fricker, Matt Sanderson, Scott Dorward, and friends, with artwork provided by Lynn Hseng, Caleb Cleveland, Irene Kano, Selin Davies, Emmanuel DeCiotti, Nicholas Gray, Pat Laboyaco, and Lee Simpson. And I apologize, I guarantee I've messed up some of those names. This 208-page hardcover is available now, carries an MSRP of $42.99, or you can grab just the PDF alone over at DriveThruRPG for $21.99. Do want to mention, if you order the physical book from Chaosium Inc., you will also receive the PDF absolutely free. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got Nameless Horrors for Call of Cthulhu. Few things I do want to mention before we jump on in. First of all, the fine folks over at Chaosium Inc. were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it's important that you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of this adventure collection, but I do want to give you a good feel for what's in the book. Lastly, I just mentioned it. This is an adventure collection, so if you are a player hoping that your keeper is going to pick up Nameless Horrors, then I would certainly recommend tune out now. As much as I'm going to try to stay away from major spoilers, there are going to be spoilers. And of course, as I randomly page through, you may actually see some things which will ruin some surprises from these adventures. You don't want that to happen. Of course, you can let your keeper know about this video, though, so they can approach the 2nd edition of Nameless Horrors to make an informed buying decision. All right, let's jump on in. So first thing I will mention is that the production quality is solid. It's what we've come to expect from Chaosium Inc. Decent page stock. We've got a couple of bookmarks as well. I can see this holding up pretty well at your gaming table with repeated use. Should also mention that this originally came out in 2015, so this is a 2nd edition. I did not have the 1st edition of Nameless Horrors, so I cannot tell you what major changes may have taken place in the adventures themselves. I don't think much. I think really the focus in this 2nd edition is new artwork, better handouts for the players, and maps. And there are actually standalone, I should say, there is actually a standalone PDF for pre-generated characters to be able to use with all 6 of these adventures. So these run the timeline from the 13th century to the modern day. And I'll also point out that I honestly don't see you being able to incorporate these adventures very easily into any ongoing campaigns. They really are designed as one shots. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to finish them in a single session. Absolutely not. But they are pretty much standalone tales. And those pre generated characters are actually designed to incorporate into these adventures very easily and to kind of fit into the stories. So the first adventure takes place both in the late 19th century and the 13th century. It is a amaranthine desire, an amaranthine desire, or something along those lines. And it takes place in the town of Dunwich, England, not Dunwich, Massachusetts. And there is a real Dunwich. And one of the things I love about this adventure is it incorporates the real history of that town. Because in the late 13th century, a big portion of this town was destroyed, and actually, a lot of it is underwater to this day, following a series of very, very catastrophic storms. And that ties into this adventure. Now, the player characters are smugglers, and they are unloading their illicit cargo on the shoreline near Dunwich in the late 19th century. And then they find themselves trapped in this time loop, which takes them back to Dunwich prior to those storms. And we have witches involved. And funny enough, those witches might be the least of the player characters' problems in this adventure. I like this adventure quite a lot. In fact, my favorite adventures in Nameless Horrors happen to be the first and last. And I will point out, because this is a time loop tale, keepers have to be kind of careful because time loop adventures and role playing games can lose their luster rather quickly. There's only so much Groundhog Day that could take place in an adventure, so keep that in mind. But I really, really do dig this first adventure and time loop that takes place. Also, got to point out, all of these adventures, some more than others, are aimed at a mature audience. There's also some kind of gruesome artwork contained within. I don't necessarily know if we're going to run across any as I randomly page through, but it is very, very possible. Next story also takes place in the late 19th century, and the player characters are all part of the Parisian art world. And there are real historical figures who are part of this adventure. And the main gist of A Message of Art is that human artistic creativity isn't natively human, it comes from beyond. And the player characters might end up with a seed of inspiration planted in them for them to create a great work of art, be it a painting or sculpture or music or writing. And if they cannot, they'll die. So I like this adventure, and I like how the inspiration spreads, and it's like a virus. It's like a disease, and very, very unique situation here. So I do like this adventure quite a bit as well. We also have And Some Fell on Stony Ground, which takes place in the 20s in small town Americana. The player characters are all citizens of this town of Stowell, and What happens here is, and this is a bit of a nod to movies like The Crazies, or I mean, I gotta be honest, I found this feels like it has some inspiration from the H.P. Lovecraft story From Beyond, which we actually have a kind of a sequel to From Beyond in this collection. This is not it. But what happens is this astronomer in town is studying the stars, and they see something that awakens them. And if you look through this telescope at this thing, then you can either have your potential unlocked and you become awakened, or your mind is shattered and you become the broken. And what's going on here is this small town is breaking up into kind of the haves and the have nots. So you've got the awakened and then you have the broken, and the awakened are actually making the broken their slaves so that the awakened can focus on the bigger, more important things in this world. So what'll happen here is if the player characters destroy the telescope, they're going to think, oh, great, excellent, we win. Well, that is not going to be the case, because things are going to go from bad to worse. Gotta be honest, I am not necessarily a big fan of survival horror role-playing game adventures. I know there's one adventure from Delta Green that kind of has the same sort of, the townspeople turn on each other and they're killing each other and things like that. Just just not my bag of tricks. So I like the premise of the adventure. I don't like the final outcome. And I should also mention that all 6 of these adventures could very easily see some, if not all, of the investigators insane or dead. So these stories don't necessarily have happy endings. So the reality is, none of these, well, okay, I'll say the first adventure and the last adventure could have happier outcomes, more positive outcomes than the other 4. But these adventures really don't jibe with my approach to Call of Cthulhu. And the reality is, every keeper is different. Some keepers out there are just completely against kind of a pulp approach to Call of Cthulhu. Others love more pulpy adventures where the investigators have higher survivability. Just like there are people out there who pretty much refuse to kill off more than one investigator, if even one investigator, in a game session. Well, others out there have absolutely no qualms about having all of their investigators buy the farm. So these tend to be, as an example, this adventure is called Bleak Prospect. These adventures do tend to be pretty bleak. So these are really designed as one-shots. Keep that in mind. I already mentioned I don't really imagine incorporating these easily into any of your ongoing campaigns. Now, having said that, I'm not trying to tell you that these aren't good adventures, or I would be very keen to actually play in them. Maybe not necessarily, I should say, run them, but they just a little too dark, maybe, for my personal tastes. So Bleak Prospect takes place during the Depression, and the player characters all live in a Hooverville. So if you're not familiar with the term Hooverville, of course, you had President Herbert Hoover, who many people feel kind of completely ignored the majority of the Depression, although he really didn't. But he got much of the blame. So if you had worn out shoes and you were shoving cardboard into your shoes so that you actually had some sort of a sole, that was known as Hoover leather. Hoovervilles were these shanty towns that would spring up, and people who had lost everything or lost their jobs or who were barely making it, maybe didn't have homes any longer, they gathered to live in these shanty towns, these Hoovervilles. So this story has this organization, this group. This is actually the one that's the sequel to From Beyond, where the machinery that the protagonist's acquaintance is using to see these beings that live within our own reality, but we can't see them. The machine allows you to see them and possibly interact with them. Well, this builds on that. And this group is using the machine to actually bring some of these creatures into being here. And these creatures actually drain the pow and the luck and kill people. And this group actually takes these creatures once they've fed on the pow and the luck of these NPCs. They're almost like batteries that they actually plug into themselves. So kind of bizarre. And this can turn out in a lot of different ways. Pretty interesting, but once again, it follows after its title. The outcome, all in all, is, at least for the player characters, going to be pretty bleak. Now, having said that, that's not to say that the players aren't going to make some sort of a positive impact. It's just not necessarily going to be a happy ending for them in most of the cases. Now we've got the Moonchild, which is modern day, supposed to take place in England, but it's even mentioned in the adventure that keepers should set this someplace that they're very familiar with to kind of utilize the sights and sounds of that place, and probably use a place that's familiar to their players as well. So this is kind of a Satanist's sort of tale here, where the player characters uh, are members of this occult group that they were in members of in college, who took part in a ritual that has marked them ever since. Now they're in their 40s, and they actually created this entity which takes the form of a child. Well, now it's a teenager, but it originally took the form of a child, and this entity is evil and trying to manipulate all of the members of this occult group, who have gone on to pretty much try to forget that night and each other over the years. So, very unique adventure. Gotta say, it does touch upon child abuse, although the child in this isn't really a child, it's this evil entity. And uh, gotta say, there is a very cutting way for the player characters to kind of disconnect themselves from this evil entity, because this evil entity does have a connection to the player characters. So this is an adventure that might be relatively tough to successfully resolve. Then we have the final adventure, which, as I already pointed out, the first and last adventures are my favorite in this collection. It is the Space Between, and this is also a modern day adventure taking place in Los Angeles. And the player characters take on, or I should say, the players take on the roles of player characters who are members of this offshoot religion. So it's supposed to be a stand in for Scientology, obviously enough. And they are true believers. and their church is making a film to help promote their dogma. And it's almost finished, and the leading lady disappears. And of course, this has thrown everything, into disarray. It's a real, wrench tossed into the works because I can't finish the film without the lead actress. And of course, the player characters start learning some things they did not know about their religion and its beliefs. Now, this is an adventure, at least in my opinion, kind of draws a little bit from John Carpenter's The Thing. In fact, this adventure itself, I could see as a John Carpenter movie easily. And the player characters can essentially be kind of taken over by this hungry void, this emptiness, because that's the whole point of this religion is you're supposed to free yourself of worry and pain and doubt by emptying yourself. Well, this hungry void really will empty you and use you as like a skin suit. I like this adventure quite a lot. Uh, Got to point out another adventure that's probably not going to have the happiest of endings for all of your players because it is very likely some, if not all, are going to be emptied or possibly become truly emptied. So you want to keep that in mind. Also, I think it's kind of funny that the the finale of the adventure actually talks about how you could kind of build off this adventure for an actual campaign, and a little bit along the lines of John Carpenter's At the Mouth of Madness, the ending of that movie. So I like that quite a lot as well. So that is a look at the 6 adventures for Call of Cthulhu Nameless Horrors 2nd edition. So let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share my final thoughts as well as a review score. So I do like all the adventures in this 2nd edition of Nameless Horrors. 2 of them I like quite a bit more than the other 4, the first and the last. But every one of these adventures is at least very, very solid. But I already pointed this out. The style of these adventures just don't jibe with my approach to Call of Cthulhu. And I'm looking at it from my group of players. So I don't think that all of these adventures would work well for them. But I also pointed out I could see myself as a player in these adventures because one thing that I mention all the time to people is that one of the most entertaining things you can do with Call of Cthulhu, especially if you have a group that gets together all the time and you play through these long extended campaigns, is to actually take a break for 2 or 3 sessions and focus on an adventure that has nothing to do with your current campaign, or maybe the campaign you just wrapped up or the one that you're about to begin, with characters that you have no association with as players. It can really be rather freeing to sit there and play in an adventure as a character where your backstory has already been provided for you and kind of opens up a lot of avenues for role playing with the knowledge that, well, if this character goes irrevocably permanently insane or ends up being killed, it's not that big a deal. It's not really my character anyway. Yes, I can absolutely recommend these 6 adventures for an approach like that. They are written for a mature audience. I also will point out that I think you'll get more out of this as a keeper, and your players will get more out of these adventures if they are role players. If they are people who just approach every one of their Call of Cthulhu characters as if it were them in those shoes, maybe not. But if you have players who can take on pre-generated characters that have backstories, and some of the backstories are pretty dark, and run with it, you're going to have a pretty good time. Should also point out, though, that it is very possible in some of these adventures where you're going to have conflict erupt between your characters, which I know some folks aren't very keen on taking place. Sometimes, you know, a little back and forth is okay. But we're talking about where their objectives are completely at loggerheads against each other. But all in all, I think Nameless Horrors 2nd Edition is pretty cool, even though maybe I wouldn't run 4 of the 6 adventures. Just me. Once again, this is a review, so you know what reviews are. They're just opinions. And I can only base my opinion on my own personal approach and the players I run role-playing games for. But all that said, I still give a huge recommendation to pick up Nameless Horrors 2nd Edition and awarded an 8 out of 10. I think if you've got the right group of players, you've got the right keeper, you will have a memorable experience with these 6 adventures if you've got the right keeper and the right group. All right, that is it for this time out. Thank you very much for tuning in for the 950th review from the Gaming Gang. And of course, if you like this video, by all means, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you do, don't forget, ring that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings at 7 p.m. Central right here on YouTube. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more that you will not find here on the YouTube channel. Everybody out there, thank you once again for hanging out, and until I see you next time, here's hoping each and every one of you gets to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.
Oh, hey, you're still here. That's okay. You don't have to leave just yet. In fact, why don't you subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel right here, or take a peek at the latest live stream, or even find out what YouTube recommends you check out from the channel. And of course, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thanks again for watching.